their hands are quite interesting. They've got 3 fingers and they've got 2 thumbs, which is extra grip for when they're climbing, which they need.
Oh, yes.
And on their rear foot, on their big toe, they've actually got 2 claws, which they use as a comb, as you can see one scratching now. The closest relative to the koala is actually the wombat. They probably don't look that similar, but the big indicator is that their pouch actually faces backwards. So when you look at a kangaroo, they're sort of, you know, their pouch kind of faces upwards, whereas with these guys, the baby's head kind of sticks out the back. Which you'd think, you know, oh, up in the tree, the baby would fall out, but the mother has a really strong muscle around the pouch to sort of hold the baby in.
Ooh.
So these guys often used to get called koala bears back in the day. I don't know if you've ever heard that expression. And they do look a lot like a cute little teddy bear, but they aren't at all related to bears. As I said before, they are a marsupial. So they primarily come out at night time, mostly nocturnal, but as you can see right now, they're awake, so depending on the mood, they do bobble. In the wild, they don't tend to live like this. They kind of tolerate each other in here, but in the wild they have what we call territories. So they have a selection of trees, which are their food trees, and sometimes the territories will cross over, but generally they live quite solitary lives. They only come together in the breeding season. The main way you can tell a difference between a male and a female, obviously size. The girls are a little bit smaller, but the boys also have a dirty stripe on their chest, whereas the girls are nice and clean and white. The boys have a stripe, and that's actually a scent gland. So they'll go up to the trunk of a tree and rub their chest on it. It leaves their smell, tells all the girls to come up their tree, and tells all the boys to rack off. And you wouldn't think it, but these little critters can make quite a big noise. The males bellow. You might have heard it on the recording down there. It's a really, really low, deep bellowing sound. And again, that's to ward off males and to attract the females. In fact, it was actually used, I don't know if you saw Lord of the Rings. Have you all seen Lord of the Rings? It was one of the sounds that was used for the orcs, the bad guys. The one you can see hopping around on the ground, that's a quokka, which is basically a type of wallaby, only found on the island of Rottnest Island, which is off the west coast of Australia. It's called Rottnest because the Dutch were the first to actually find the island, and they thought they looked like rats. So rat in Dutch is rot. But they're not a rat. They're very, very sweet. You can see them hopping around. I think when the early settlers first arrived in Australia, the koalas were actually targeted as for their pelt, for their fur, and the government actually put out I guess a reward for going out and killing all of these koalas to get their skin, which was quite horrible because, you know, these guys can't exactly get away from you very quickly. They're quite easy to catch, and yeah, they killed about 100,000 of them. And now they're quite endangered. They're only really found on the east coast of Australia, so it's a shame. They used to be everywhere, but due to hunting, not so much anymore. But there's only one breed of koala, but there's several varieties as you go up and down the coast. So up north in Queensland, where it's quite tropical and warm, they have very thin coats, so they look a bit scrawny and ugly looking. As you go, these guys are from the New South Wales area, so they're sort of in between. And as you go down to Victoria, where it's really cold and alpine, they're very cute and very fluffy. Their fur would be about double the length of this, so you can imagine they're quite fuzzy. People often think they do look really soft, but they've actually got quite wiry fur, quite rough. Because they're a bit too big to fit into the hollows of trees to keep out of the rain, they have to have a really thick coat to protect their skin from the rain when it's all cold. So guaranteed on a wet day, they look all wet on the outside, but their skin would be nice and dry. And he just did it too. Do you have any questions, anybody? I think I've covered everything. Oh, a question we often get is if they smell like eucalyptus leaves, and they don't. Maybe if you get a whiff of their breath, but some people think that they kind of sweat out a eucalyptus smell, but they don't. And the other one is if they are drunk, because they often look like they're kind of just sitting there dozing. But again, like I said before, they're just sleeping and getting as much energy from the food that they can. But I'll be here for a few more minutes if you want to ask some questions.
Thank you.
That's a good one. In the wild, they live till about 12. In captivity, we've got some here that are about 22. So they live a whole lot longer in captivity.
And they have one joey at a time,
Yes.
and one a year?
It depends on the weather, really. I know that sounds really strange, but if it's a really good season and there's a lot of food, definitely they'll have one a year. If it's, just say there's a drought and the food quality isn't very good, they may not. They may just have the one joey for like a 2-year period, and usually after a year the joey's sort of getting old enough to kind of fend for itself. So they usually stay with their mum for about 2 years. So yeah, it just depends on what the season has been like and the food source. This is what it revolves around.
The pooping.
So in captivity, then do they have about one a year?
We have breeding programs at the zoo, so because koalas are very sought after in zoos internationally, we do have a breeding program where we're constantly sending koalas, baby koalas overseas to other institutions. So we do have quite a regular breeding program happening. So most of our females would have a joey a year. As they get older, we give them a break. They can retire.